Hello, everyone. It's Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, along with my co-host Chris Kay, and welcome to another exciting episode of Debating Metal. Today is part 4 of our ongoing series called The 10 Most Important in Metal History, and this week we're giving you our take on the 10 most important rhythm guitarists in metal history, and this should be a doozy.
While lead guitarists and singers more often get the spotlight, the rhythm guitarist is the meat on the bones of the band. They play the riffs that we at times remember even more than the solos, add that extra spice of melody, or even sometimes that spotlight-hogging singer is the rhythm guitarist. We're going to discuss who we believe are the most important to ever grace the stage.
So if you caught the first 3 of this series, or this is your first time listening to Debating Metal, I want to say thank you. And so that you don't miss another episode, please click subscribe, download, like, or follow on your favorite podcast platform, and you'll get a new episode delivered just about every week or so. Chris, rhythm guitarist, we have come to part 4 of our series, and we're getting close to the end. But rhythm guitarist is a really, really important one. And I think that's part of the reason why we left it towards the end. This is a big one. And I think I'm going to be sparking up some more controversy like I have the other 3.
Well, I mean, it's tough to say who's more important when it comes to a part of the band, but we all know the bass is the least important. So,
What?
No, I'm just playing. So no, it's going to be an interesting one. I had about 16, 17 different guys on my list, and I had to cut it down. So I had to kind of weigh the pros and cons of each player. I didn't think it was going to be like that. I thought rhythm was going to be one of the easier ones for me to figure out, and it really wasn't. So it'll be some interesting debate.
I think for me, the top half was real simple for me to figure out. It was the bottom half, the 6 through 10, that I really struggled with and said, there's this guy, there's this guy, there's this one and that one. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Because I mean, I am personally leaving off some dudes here that really are what I would consider important, but are they the 10 most important to me? Or the 10 most important in general, what I believe is, the 10 most important. It's difficult. But some of these guys, like you say, okay, well, this guy was at this time frame and this guy was this period. And it's like, well, was he more important than the other one? And of course, that leaves the debate of at what point is the cutoff for you personally? Thinking, okay, this guy's too new to be important to the history of metal, but he's so good or so important in general that maybe he does belong on the list,
Yeah, it's worth a debate because, obviously there's the modern influence, right? So there's like, it sucks sometimes because, of course, like whoever came first is going to have that legacy there, and they have the longer amount of time to influence people or play several groundbreaking albums or whatever, right? But in a lot of effect, like if you look at the modern scene or just the effect that since you've been around, since you've been listening to music, the interpretation could be different. And even so, more so, like when you think about countries that we don't typically talk about, etc. So there's a lot to talk about, and I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah. So let's go through it now. I believe I went first last week, so it's your turn to go first.
Okay. I'm gonna start out with I guess this would be the third member of this band we've talked about. So I'm gonna start off with Alex Lifeson.
Only 3.
Well, that's a good streak there, right? You got 10 slots for 3 different instruments, and we got one person there from each of those parts of the band, and there's only ever been 3 members at any given time. Obviously, there's more than just the 3 in their overall scope, but these are the guys that when you think of Rush, you think of, right?
It was only 4, right?
No, they had some other members early on before, you know,
Ah.
it counts. It's in their history.
Okay.
So, um, so Alex Lifeson. Um, you know, I had said in a previous episode that I thought that Getty was, uh, and I mean this in the most polite way as possible, was the weak link of the band. And I don't think by that any stretch that he's weak. I just mean that there's that many other players that I thought were better, right? But also that I thought, Alex maybe brings a little bit more to the table and Neil brings maybe a little more to the table. Um, but that's a really hard sentence to say because I respect the three musicians so much. Um, but obviously, I'm also ranking Alex lower on his instrument. So that's, I can see how somebody might perceive that to be that I'm, you know, not being consistent here. But I would disagree in that there's a lot more rhythm guitarists and there's a lot more lead guitarists out there than there are bassists. So therefore, Alex being number 10 on the list kind of puts him higher in a way.
I mean, I see your reasoning. I kind of get the concept you're trying to come up with here.
So that being said, when it comes to Rush, you have three guys playing instruments, and obviously Getty's playing the keyboards as well. The other guys play multiple instruments. There's a lot going on with their stage performance where they're doing lots of different interesting things. And one thing that's always consistent and that's underlying and that you really don't think about because there is the element of Getty singing, which is so unique and interesting. You have the bass line that you can hear that's so great. You have the drums, which are just awe-inspiring. But what also is happening at the same time, which is interestingly underlying sometimes, is the amazing riffs that are going on. And when you think of Rush and you think of all of their amazing songs, consistently one of the things that you will come to mind before anything else is the riffs of those songs. And I like, for me, when I think of, like, say, Limelight, the first thing that you hear is the guitar riff. That to me is, I've mentioned it before, that's my favorite Rush song. But many times when you listen to a Rush song, the most immediate and impactful thing that you hear is the riff, and that's what carries you. And Alex has written so many amazing riffs over the years. I think he's super underrated. He is a really just nice and like fun to listen to guy, and I love, like, he has a new project going on. And I've listened to some of the stuff, and I was very shocked, like, that it is Alex Lifeson because it's so different than what I would expect from Rush. Uh, and so they're called Envy of None, and it's just so interesting to hear because it's nothing like Rush. And if you're into, I don't even know what to call it. It's like kind of soft rock, um, indie-ish kind of stuff. Then it's really interesting to hear Alex Lifeson playing on that stuff. So check it out if you're a fan of Rush, but if you're not, stay the hell away from it.
you know, I like Alex a lot, and it's funny because you made a statement last week, and you reiterated it now that you consider Getty to be the weakest link of the band. And it's hard because that is one of the most talented trios of all time.
Yeah, I again mean absolutely no disrespect when I say it, and it's like I said, a hard sentence for me to even say
Right.
because it has such a negative connotation, and I don't want it to be that way.
Yeah, because it's really, I mean, when you think about like how talented Geddy really is. Keyboard player, bass player, uh, you know, vocalist,
Mhm.
songwriter. Um, it's pretty wild, like it almost it's almost kind of weird. You can say, well, all Alex does is play guitar, you know, kind of thing. It's like, and it's weird. And then you say, well, all Neil did was play drums, and
Well,
that's
that's not
such
true
a
because he also wrote all of the
well, right, and,
lyrics.
and he wrote all the lyrics. So it's one of those things where you kind of like, well, Alex did the least, but in reality, we all know that's not true. And Alex, basically, because you see that the band ended because of the passing of Neil, right? You understand that each one of those three parts to that band were so intricate and needed by the other two, or or the other three, whatever you want to look at it, that it's almost irreplaceable kind of thing. So they are that good, all three of them, and combined, they're just amazing. And I had one day, I want to say maybe 4 months ago, 5 months ago, I'm driving to work and I'm listening to Limelight, and you said that's your favorite song, and I don't know what it was that I'm listening to it, and I'm like, this is a really beautiful song.
Hmm.
It's one of the it was so weird. Like, my favorite Rush song is Tom Sawyer, right? But Limelight being number two for me, we'll put it that way. Limelight being number two it's such a beautiful song. Like, I get to the break where it's Alex hits that really long, drawn out note, and then it's just kind of like very not melancholy is not the word I want to use. It's just like very hazy kind of sound to it in that middle breakdown part before it goes rips into the solo.
Hmm.
And I'm sitting there going, man, wow, this is such a cool song. And mind you, I've heard the song, bajillion times. And it just like really just kind of sunk into me. I'm like, how good that song really is.
Isn't it
Um,
funny how sometimes when you're listening to something you've heard before, you'll just have that moment of like something hits you in a different way than it ever has before?
oh yeah. Yeah. I love when that happens too, because I'm like, this is so cool. I've discovered something else about this song, or
Yeah.
a song, whatever song it may be. So cool.
Sometimes when I'm listening on, say, headphones or I'm in my car, I have a different experience than I've ever had with the song. And like I'll find something underlying, some kind of melody, some kind of harmony, something that I never noticed before, a bass line, and I'm just like, you know, uh, born anew into that song or something.
Oh
It's
yeah.
yeah,
Especially if you got good sounding headphones on, you'll really get that spatialness about the song, and you get to hear things that you don't hear on a typical basis because you have the ambient background.
that would have been like a perfect moment if we had sponsors, like you know, buy these headphones. Yeah,
Yeah, imagine, I think that there's a headphone that Jericho gets sponsored by. It's like, hey, we need to look into that.
yeah, right.
All right. So Alex Lifeson is your number 10. All right.
Yes,
So
sir.
my number 10. My number 10 is a combination of two guys, very similar to what we talked about when we did lead guitars. This is Michael Denner and Hank Sherman from Merciful Fate. It is the two-headed guitar monster for Merciful Fate. So I picked them because, quite honestly, I don't know, and maybe I need to do a little bit more research onto this. I
Just
don't
suddenly,
know.
I picked them because I don't
No,
know.
I don't know which one is actually playing lead, and which one's actually playing rhythm. Now, they do alternate. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Hank Sherman plays more leads, but I cannot verify that, and I don't want to just say that out loud because someone out there, in Europe, is going to sit there and say, "No, he doesn't."
Well, no, we
So
do want to say that so that that person in Europe says that, and we learn something. So,
Yes.
person in Europe
Go right
that's
ahead.
bothered, say it.
Yeah. Only Europe though. It can't be from anywhere
Yeah,
else.
Afghanistan, not this time. We can talk about something else.
So anyhow, Dennis Sherman, Merciful Fate. I mean, if you think about their influence for that short period of time in the 80s that they were popular with the thrash scene, you listen to Melissa, and that first album is just chock full of riffs. And it's such a good album. And even portions of obviously of Don't Break the Oath has some really good riffs. I mean, the song A Dangerous Meeting, starts out with that big chugging riff and goes into, that thumping rhythm. It's a yeah, that's a really cool song. Then when you have songs like Evil, Curse of the Pharaohs, there's such good riffs in two albums. And I say two albums because yes, they've done more since then, but the influence that they laid and the importance behind them was based on those first two albums. And you can throw in the Merciful Fate EP, or some people know it as the Nuns Have No Fun EP. That also had a couple 4 songs on it. So those, I would say, I think Melissa and Don't Break the Oath each had 8 songs, if I'm not mistaken. So you got 16 plus 4, you got 20 songs to choose from that were so influential, so deep cut into a scene, specifically the thrash scene of heavy metal, that the, those two guys playing those riffs and laying down those rhythms were really, really important. And then on top of that, it went past the thrashing. It went into the extreme metal scene. It went into the black metal scene. It went into speed metal, because thrash metal and speed metal are not the same necessarily. So it really got deep into a lot of different genres, which was funny because a lot of those genres started around the same time that they did.
Yeah.
But that's how impactful they were. So that's my number 10.
Well, it's a good choice. I did not have them on my list, and
Now you regret it.
I don't know if I regret it, but they're certainly up there. They're at least in the top 20 for me. But my number 9 is going to maybe be a little bit controversial, especially because I'm not a huge fan of this band by any means. But I really thought about, my experience growing up and, references that I've heard from modern players and things like that. I think this guy, maybe I'll get a little backlash on, but let's see. Um, I've got Zaki Vengeance from Avenged Sevenfold.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
yeah. So a lot of the guys my age that I know started playing, and a lot of the YouTubers that I watch that play guitar, and that's kind of the thing now, right? Is like a lot of musicians don't tour. They just play their songs, they make their albums in their house and play on YouTube, and they have a better income from that. And it's a different generation than what we grew up with, right? But a lot of the guys that, like I said, around my age, that I grew up with, or same age or point, right? Um, reference him as a huge uh, influence on their playing, etc. And so I'm not the biggest fan of this band, but I don't have to be to think about their, you know, influence, etc. So it is a different take on things, I think, but from the perspective of where we are now and where the music scene is and where it's going, I think it is important to acknowledge, not just the absolute classics or the oldest ones out there, but the who influences the now. And so, if I'm also picking out, like, who is the standout in the band, I think he is, along with the original drummer, the Rev. Those are the 2 that I really think of when I think of the quality of that band. Obviously people have their opinions on them. Some people think like their names are kind of goofy and angsty and this and that. The music hasn't always been consistent, etc. Like whatever, it doesn't matter. You know, Influence is influence, and skill is skill. So I would say of those, features, I definitely have a lot of respect for the dude as far as his playing ability and his widespread influence on the new generation of people out there playing.
Oh, so you went the modern route.
I did on this one, yeah.
Yeah,
I could
because I mean, think about a
put
band that was
higher, yeah,
right. The
but
band was formed in 1999. So
that's
when you,
24 years now.
yeah, I mean, it's 24 years, but
25, really,
it's
right?
also when you think about heavy metal started so much longer before that, it's kind of like they're 20, 25, 30 years into metal, if you want to
Yeah.
look at it that way. And um, we're picking someone like that. But hey, you know what? They have their place in metal, and that's for sure. I'm not a big well. Let me back off. I'm not. It's not that I'm not a big fan. At the time that they became popular, I was not in a place in my life where I could I got into them. It was really weird. Like I was into a lot of the bands like Creed and Godsmack and all those that came out at that time, and
Hmm.
Avenged Sevenfold for whatever reason never hit my radar. And I don't know if it was because I didn't like their attitude or I didn't never really got to listen to them, but I never got into them whatsoever until the Hail to the King album that came out. And then I've heard, obviously there was some controversy because they copied some riffs from some bands, if you want to look at it like that. But you know,
I mean, who hasn't, right?
well, there's one song that pretty much is really blatant, but I don't want to get into that right now. And it's one of those things where I heard the songs. I'm like, oh, the songs are good, but I just never continued to. Oh, let me hear more. Let me hear more. Let me hear more. I never really did that, and I should. It's the same thing with what's the other one? Black Veil Brides.
I was listening to some of the different bands that we're, members that we're talking about today. Like I made a little playlist and I went on a walk with my dog and so I was just listening to some of the songs so I could get a little bit of feel for their musicianship and etc. So I made a little playlist and as I was listening to them, Avenged Sevenfold came on and I was actually thinking that I was like, this seems like a band that you would have listened to, considering the other people you've enjoyed at that time period. And then I was kind of thinking like maybe they were just a little bit too late, in comparison to some of these other bands cuz like Creed started maybe a little bit
I mean,
earlier.
Creed started in '98. I mean, they got popular in '98,
Yeah.
'99. Avenged Sevenfold. I mean, they became popular in 2005.
Yeah. So
I mean, their
that's what I
first
mean.
album, right? Their first album is 2001, 2000. Waking the Fallen is 2003. City of Evil is 2005. So it was right after that, but it's funny. It's kind of like in between. Like I really got back into a lot of stuff. Um, right before I got married the second time. And
Mhm.
then right after I got married the second time, it's kind of like when it fell off. And
Gotcha.
then when I split up with my second wife and then I was going out with who eventually would become my wife now, she's into metal, you know. Then we went to Ozfest and we discovered bands and we listened to this music that was basically what is now metalcore. At the time, I did they call it metalcore or was it still the new wave of American heavy metal? I don't know. I never got that deep into it, but one band that continuously slipped off of my radar. Two bands, like I just mentioned, Black Veil Brides and Avenged Sevenfold,
Mm,
and I've never understood why. I never tried or looked into it. I just haven't. So
fair enough.
so be it.
Can't listen to everybody.
No.
Or you can if you have immortality.
So you mentioned their band names or their stage names, and it's funny because M Shadow, Zachy Vengeance, Sinister Gates, Johnny Christ, and then the Rev passes away, and so they they temporarily use Mike Portnoy for an album, and then they hire Brooks
Boy, they
Waxman.
screwed him over.
Oh, I know. Well, I think he screwed himself over more than
Yeah,
anything.
I know. It's a little bit of both,
He
right?
he
Like
he. You know what he did?
he left he left the band.
No, you know what he did? He pulled, the psychiatrist in Some Kind of Monster for Metallica. He did the same thing that dude did. The psychiatrist moved to San Francisco, and then the band's like, "Yeah, you're fired."
I'm part of the band now.
Yeah.
Did you know? Of course you don't, but because you don't watch Death Clock. They did a parody of that. They had a psychiatrist that tried to join the band, and it was a hilarious
Oh
episode.
my god. So yeah. So that's what Mike Portnoy. He thought he was in the band and left Dream Theater thinking, he was in Avenged Sevenfold.
Oh
Oh
wow!
well. That's the real simple version of it. I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so we're going to number 9 for me, um, is Wolf Hoffman from Accept.
Okay. Okay.
Now, I tell you, you listen to that first riff for Balls to the Wall, and you can understand how and why this guy is pretty impactful, and he has a long history of some really good riffs. Um, to say that he was the man behind one of the first speed metal songs ever is pretty impressive. I mean, Fast as a Shark comes out in 1982, and you're like, whoa, what is this? And that whole intro with the German folk song, and then you hear the record scratch, and boom, you have this amazing fast double bass song, and that riff that just plays there is
Mhm.
just incredible. And there's just so much. I mean, song after song, Restless and Wild, even Princess of the Dawn. There's some haunting, guitar work in that song. Then of course, Balls to the Wall, just ripping. I mean, that riff is just, it's one of the heaviest riffs out there. And in London Leather Boys, and all the shit that they put. I mean, they've got some really good riffs. And then when they broke up, got back together, and now that they have Mike Tornillo as their lead singer, the Blood of the Nations album, there's some really killer riffs. I mean, that's what he does. He is a guy who is one of those top riff masters of all time. And if you don't believe me, if you disagree with me, listen to early Accept, and now even listen to the newer Accept stuff. Blood of the Nation specifically, it has some great stuff, but even the newer albums, like we listened to recently, Too Mean to Die, The Rise
Mhm.
of Chaos, those albums are really good, you know. And it's funny because Peter Baltus, who the bass player who left, he's like, well, how long can you go on playing the same songs over and over again? And it's kind of weird when you look at that kind of perspective, because he was in the band for so long. It's like, that's your band. That's, I mean, like AC/DC. They've been criticized because they only have one song, and they've just played it 300 different ways. I disagree, you know, wholeheartedly. And Accept has a sound. Accept has a style.
Mhm.
Metallica has a sound, they have a style. Anthrax has a sound, they have a style. And that's what they're known for. Some of these bands try to alter it, and that's when things go off the rails. Except really, I mean, other than one album, really have stuck to that formula. And
Mhm.
specifically, they've stuck to that formula since they've returned and came back in 2012. That formula has not changed whatsoever. Is that good or bad? That's all dependent on the listener. Because to me, if you got a good melody, if you got a good hook, because like I've always said, it's all about the hook for me. If you got the hook, it doesn't matter if its songs sounds similar or the song, to somebody else. Well, that's the same thing they always play. If the hook is good, the hook is good. So I think Wolf Hoffman definitely deserves his place in the pantheon of heavy metal. And hell, I mean, he's pretty much recorded all the guitar parts in Accept ever since Restless and Wild. So even though there's two guitarists or three guitarists now in the band, he's still doing a majority of the guitar work on those albums.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. I didn't have Wolf on my list either, but yeah, that I mean, uh, I can't argue too many points there. Like he has definitely influenced a lot of players out there. To me, that you know means a lot when I'm thinking about who I'm picking. But I guess there's a few that I maybe had a little bit different perspective on. So,
Yeah, I
uh,
mean, I've been an Accept fan for a really long time, and I just think he's extremely underrated.
mhm.
But he's such a good guitar. Like when we went to see them, and for lack of a better way of describing it, we saw them in a parking lot. Okay, but we
Yeah,
were
I
right
mean,
there. I mean, we were,
literally, yeah, and we
you
were on
know,
the front. We were
yeah, we
right
were in the
there.
front in the parking lot, and I mean, to see those guys playing, and they have such a cool setup because there were no amps. It's all their digital shit coming through. It's really cool setup. And what I noticed too is that the guitar players all use the same guitar so that they all sound the same
Mm,
live, at least. Which is I think pretty interesting. But
it was different, yeah.
yeah, anyway.
All right, so I'm gonna move on to my number 8, and I've got a duo here. I'm going with Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman. And when I think of Slayer, I don't necessarily think of lead guitar parts. I think of awesome riffs. And between the two of them, they wrote some freaking amazing riffs that will always stick with me. Um, you know, more information over the years has kind of come out of like who has been the songwriters, the players of the band. Obviously, if you have been reading recent news, you saw Kerry King talking about how he played the bass on the albums. Um, you saw him talking about how he and Jeff used to trade parts. And so, if he wrote a song, especially as time went on, he wrote all of the song. And if Jeff wrote a song, he wrote all of that song. And then what they would do is they would trade off, guitar parts and they would play each other's guitars when they were recording so that there was like a distinct um, rhythm sound and there was a distinct lead sound. And I think that's pretty cool. It's a very different take on things than I've heard from other bands. Not saying that they're absolutely unique, but I just thought that was really cool factoid there. But when it comes to Slayer, I mean, Slayer obviously had a much stronger career at the very beginning, and they've persevered on even to the point where recently they've gotten back together to play a few shows. Um, of course, it's not my version of Slayer. No Dave Lombardo, and obviously no Jeff Hanneman. But uh, these guys right here that we're talking about, um, for me, have definitely influenced so many players out there. That I think when Rain and Blood came out, it was a jolt in the system to everyone. Like, just, it's quick, it's fast, it hits you hard, and leaves you just kind of like, What the hell just happened?" One of those that you have to kind of like listen to again and again and again. And I gotta tell you, like that's one album along with the next two albums after that that I can just go back to and enjoy. It's quick 30 minutes of hard hitting music that I don't skip a track on. And over the years, sure they changed, but I was listening to somebody talk recently about Slayer's influence, and they were talking about how, again, the younger generation, or at least my age generation, God Hates Us All came out around early 2000s. I don't know the exact date off the top of my head. But there's a whole different generation of, and I've told you, if you've listened to the show, that I'm not a fan of that album, but that album has a huge impact on some modern players that have, again, with that YouTube generation, or players that are touring now, the, what do you call it, the metalcore kind of crowd. God Hates Us All had that huge impact as well. And so they're beyond the scope of just what I like. Again, they had a kind of a second renaissance in a way. And a lot of us old heads that listened to it went like, "This sucks. I don't like this. This isn't what I like," but there's people that we're not thinking about that just absolutely ate that shit up. So, for me, I couldn't deny they had to be on this list.
You know, Slayer in my fandom for Slayer is really odd. Um, I like a bunch of their older stuff and didn't get much into them after they came out with the covers album. So late '90s, early, well, Undisputed Attitude came out in '96. God Hates Us All came out in 2001, by the way. So kind of mid '90s.
It was that early?
Yeah, kind of
Wow.
mid '90s is when I kind of lost touch with Slayer. I mean, I see South of Heaven '88, Season Abyss '90, Divine Intervention '94, and an Undisputed Attitude '96. I remember when that album came out. I was excited. I got the promo. I listened to it. I'm like, this is a covers album, and it's like, oh, it's not bad, but I didn't know any of the bands that they liked because they were a lot more into the punk and hardcore scene than I was used to.
Yeah.
So then they released, Diabolus and Musica, and it was just like, all right, I'm not into this anymore.
I'm out.
Yeah, exactly. So, they kind of lost me in that period. But at the same time, if I had an opportunity to go see them, I would. And I ended up seeing them at Ozfest. And then I ended up seeing them at in the 2000s. What was that tour that was always sponsored by Monster Energy Drink? I forgot what it was called, but I got to see them, with Anthrax and Motorhead and all this stuff, and it was they've always been impressive to me. So my fandom has always kind of gone in and out, and so for me, they don't have that same kind of importance, I guess you could say. And I think if I was going to put someone on my list, it might not necessarily be the duo that like you have,
Mhm.
but it would probably be Jeff. Um, Only because I know he wrote some of the most killer songs that band ever came up with. So
It's fair.
you know, but alas, he's not my number 8 guy. Number 8 for me is Max Cavalera from Sepultura.
Yeah.
And, there's just something to be said about a guy who gets a guitar and takes the 2 bottom strings off, or the 2 high strings, if you want, however you want to look at it, and only plays the 4 lowest sounding strings. He basically told you, I don't play lead guitar. I don't need those 2 strings. They get in the way. So he has guitars that only have 4 strings. E A D G. Boom. The same 4 strings a bass has. So it's pretty funny. And I've seen it. I saw him playing live, and I'm like, holy shit, this guy only plays with 4 strings. But
Mhm.
it's there's a reason, because he doesn't play lead guitar. So some of the riffs that man has come up with, pretty freaking awesome. You listen to stuff that's on, Chaos AD. I mean, s- that that album to me is amazing, but other people like the heavier stuff. By the time Chaos AD came out, a lot of people listening to saying Sepultura sold out, but you listen to songs like Refuse, Resist, Territory, and Slave New World. That riff in Slave New World, oh my God, it's just so freaking heavy, And it's funny, we say the same things about all these riffs, and they're so simple in some ways. It just like dun 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 dun, 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 and it's just fucking heavy. It's like it's so wild to think about. But you know, Biotech is Godzilla, really, really big song. Propaganda. I mean, that's you know, all the music composed by Sepultura. You know what? I bet you anything, 90% of it is Max with the riffs. The lyrics are different. Lyrics, he's shared duties with that. But you go back to an album like Arise, Dead Embryonic Cells, Desperate Cry, Arise. I mean, the riffs are there, and he's been doing it since he was a little kid. He continues to do it with Soulfly. I mean, the riffs in Soulfly. Forget about Sepultura. Think about the stuff he does with Soulfly, and he goes in and out between extreme metal and new metal and this, that, and the other thing metal. you know. And now him and his brother have re-recorded the first three Sepultura albums.
Yeah,
So
I've listened to those. Those are pretty cool.
yeah, they're great, and the
And
fact that they sound so good now,
yeah,
so it's Max deserves his place, and he's all about the rhythm. I mean, there's when you think about what he does, he's rhythm and vocals. That's it. He doesn't even want to play lead. He's like, there's nothing for it.
fair enough. Um, when you were saying like they sold out by Chaos AD, do you think there's like people out there that are like Metallica sold out when they released Kill 'Em All?
Yeah, because they didn't put out a demo that was just as good. Well, it's just the same songs, guys. No, but you know what? I mean, you see the interviews with Cliff Burton. He says it. He goes, man, we released a song like Fade to Black, and people's like, oh, you sold out. Fade to Black, second album.
I know second album, but I'm just thinking like
You know,
when they released the first album, like when they put that demo together,
they were
they
done. Like, so, I mean, Chaos AD for Sepultura, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's their fifth album.
yeah.
Now I can sit there and say, yeah, you know what? If you want to sit there and say Roots, they sold out. Okay, I get that.
Well, yeah, I mean that's completely different, but like I don't even think that they went like I hate even saying this. They went like deeper into their roots, right? Like that's kind of the gimmick of the album.
Right.
So, I know it's a bad pun, but I mean it's literal, right? So, yeah, I mean it's hard to say they sold out with Roots, but like I think they sold out maybe when Max left the band. I,
Well, it's funny because when Max left the band, they kind of went back to their roots, oddly enough,
yeah,
playing
no,
playing
I
more
know.
thrash, and but they got lost. I mean, after Max left, I mean,
It's not Sepultura to me. Like I like some of the music, and again like I like Sammy Hagar version of Van Halen. So who am I to complain, right? But what I'm saying is like to me when I listen to them, sometimes I'm like should have just called it a different band. That's also coming from the guy that listened to every iteration of Black Sabbath. So take it as you will. Um, yeah. Anyway, um, let's move on to
number 7.
so just like you picked somebody that is influential in South America as well as the rest of the world. But I'm gonna pick somebody that comes from a different part of the world than us as well. Mila Petroza from Creator. Um, you know, being that one of the more predominant forms of metal today existing, especially new music that comes out, is more um, of the extreme metal end of things. I would say that Creator had a massive impact, especially over in Europe. Um, those early albums, especially, you can look back and say, um, "Pleasure to Kill" is, we've talked about influential albums in the past, and "Pleasure to Kill," a lot of people will, cite as one of those landmark thrash albums. So Millie is the one who wrote, pretty much all the music. He does the vocals, primary songwriter for the band. And so a lot of the thrash and more extreme metal bands that we have seen over the years really kind of changed and you know altered their styles to kind of fit into that style of like what Creator was doing. And of course, we haven't seen that as much over here in the States, but there's a bigger metal scene than obviously beyond like the United States, right? So, um, it's interesting to me when you like think about today and like who are the biggest bands, aside from the big four, but like who are the biggest bands of the modern era, and most of them are playing some kind of extreme metal, whether they're using clean vocal mix with harsh vocals, etc. Like metalcore is a lot of times like the predominant stuff, and it all roots back to those early extreme metal roots. And you know, I'm a huge fan of Creator. I, have been around or pretty much their entire career. But I obviously didn't get into them until like the early 90s. But, you know, to me, just beyond our typical scope, like there was that influence from the German scene. And you talked about earlier with like um, Merciful Fate. There's some of those earlier bands from that part of Europe that just really, kind of like started different scenes. Like if they were the early progenitors of a certain type of music, then people took those elements, like we talk about with Black Sabbath all the time, right? Like to me, Black Sabbath was not like a metal band at the beginning. They were a hard rock kind of bluesy band, but everything that we know as metal today kind of rooted from there. And so that early extreme metal, a lot of times coming from Creator is, underrated in my scope of things. But when I looked through interviews and stuff, I saw so many people citing that was kind of one of those early bands that really influenced so many people. And being the main songwriter, the guitarist, etc., you know, that is a big factor.
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing all the ads when I was looking in magazines for Creator, and seeing the mascot. I never got into them. We talked about that when we talked about Creator, on earlier episodes. It's one of those things where, sort of like Voivod, I saw ad after ad after ad for Voivod and for Creator and certain things, and for whatever reason, it never pulled me enough to sit there and say, "Hey, let me check this out."
Yeah.
You know, and I guess maybe because the bigger bands, like the big four bands, had bigger advertisements, and they were more popular in general. You plus, it was harder for a band like Creator to come over from, Europe to come here and play. I was still young, obviously in the 80s, although maybe I could have gotten into some of the clubs if they were playing, all ages shows, but I don't know. I never tried because it wasn't my thing. Like I didn't go to my first concert till I was 16 years old, or almost 16. So, and I wasn't driving, so I went into I got a ride from my best friend's brother, and he picked us up and drove us home. You know, but
Mhm.
it wasn't the same. Like I didn't travel by myself very often, so that and the fact that if they did come, I didn't go to the clubs. But most of the time, these European bands did not make it here. They had to be a big time name, and let's flip that, because English bands came here a lot, but for whatever reason, European German bands did not. Those or anything that was not on uh, the British Isles. Put it that way.
Yeah, it's
Hardly
too expensive, and they didn't have the saturation of the market, and it was more difficult. Uh,
right,
and a
and they
lot of
didn't
the
have
stuff is now like, especially, it's so interesting. Like, there's one I'm going to talk about later that there's like that modern rehash. Like, people didn't even know of some of these bands when they were really like in their heyday, and some of their most classic albums now. But
right.
it's like there's two lifespans of some of these bands or some of these players. Yeah.
And it's funny because I'm the person that I'm going to speak about next. You could almost put it in that same kind of category, but it's also dependent on your record company. Are they willing to put up the money to send you overseas?
Hmm.
Some record companies believed in some bands more than others. And if they weren't doing, if they weren't doing well in the United States, or if they weren't doing well even in their hometown or in their area of Europe, they weren't going to be coming to the States to play, because why? They weren't moving units,
Yeah.
you know. So um, segueing into the artist that I'm talking about, that goes kind of along the same lines that we're just literally talking about. My number 7 is Tom G. Warrior, or Thomas G. Fisher from Celtic Frost. Or, as back in the day, we said Celtic Frost, and especially if you grew up in New York or the Northeast because of the Boston Celtics. But it later became known that the band preferred to be called Celtic Frost, even though they themselves said Celtic Frost in the early 80s. Whatever. Celtic Frost, Tom G. Warrior. Um, when I think back and listen to this, listen to Celtic Frost. They don't have guitar solos. All Tom G. Warrior played was riffs and rhythms. And that was it. I mean, there's barely a solo to be found. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of atmospheric stuff.
Hmm.
But I mean, really, there's not, you're not hearing some dude shred at all, you know? And so they would I mean, you could almost put them down as an originator, or the deep originator of a breakdown. But they didn't have the same kind of breakdown. They just didn't play solos. They just played riffs and kept on going. And I mean, the riffs are cool. I mean, listen to some of the riffs that they do, Circle of the Tyrants, or Morbid Tales, or Procreation of the Wicked. Man, that song is so heavy. And then Sepultura did a cover of that song, made it even heavier. How do you do that?
Right.
So
Like, some of these, you go like, this was so heavy. How did they make it heavier?
exactly, but I mean, Celtic Frost really did some really cool stuff, and the classic albums, are really, really, there's some heavy stuff on them, and there's some really good riffs. I mean, Visions of Mortality, like I said, Procreation of the Wicked, really good. Morbid Tales, again, Dethroned Emperor. Holy crap, that song is heavy. Um, so, and what I really, really like about Celtic Frost and their recordings, they're very dry, they're very simple, but because there's only 3 instruments and a singer, every little thing is so clear. We talked about Martin Ain last week, uh, and how his bass cut through because there was only 3 instruments and it was so clear. But I mean, the drums were recorded very well. For if you want to put it this way, the guitars were probably the worst thing that was on the songs, on the recordings, until later on, because they were able to get better technology. But their low budgets, their guitars didn't sound that great, and yet the songs still came across heavy. So that's a testament to Tom and Martin, when it came to the way they recorded their albums.
I like that their guitars didn't sound that great. That's why he's my number. I'm kidding.
Because it may not have sounded good on record, but he's still a badass riffer.
Yes, agreed. So that is going to bring me to my number 6. This is Mr. Scott Ian from a little known band called Anthrax. So Scott Ian, to me, when I would see Anthrax early on, mostly the pictures and ads, or just some interviews, whatever. Like, I always thought of him as the front man. And so, obviously he's not the singer, he's not the front man per se, but I kind of always thought of him that way because he is the image and voice of the band, much like Kerry King is that for Slayer. And, beyond the guitar solos, beyond the amazing singers that the band's had, etc. Obviously we've talked about Charlie Benanti, being one of the best drummers out there, and to me, Scott Ian was just always kind of like that. Beyond just being a player, like, he was more of an image too, and I think, like, in some regard, like, he influenced people through that aspect of it. Like, you don't have to be the actual front man to be kind of the face of the band. He is the primary songwriter for their music, at least, over the years was, primary lyricist, and, not during the John Bush era, but, pretty much any of the stuff with Joey Belladonna, and, was very influential in their what's the word I'm looking for? Like, their image.
Their image, their direction, everything.
Yeah, so, bringing in, obviously, like, the Judge Dredd kind of stuff, the comic booky feel, the like you said, the direction of their music, all those things. Like, he is huge for that band, right? But beyond that, like, he is always been one of those guys that's been over all these documentaries, interviews. He's one of those guys that, like, thrives in the metal scene, and he's very visible, very vocal, and one of those guys you like to see because, like, his opinion, he's not like somebody out there causing drama, right? Like, he's just a likable dude that is in love with metal, and so, like, beyond just being a player in a band, to me, he's one of those flag bearers for metal. And so, when I think of him as, like, a multimedia kind of person in the metal scene, like, more approachable, more likable than some of the people that I think are even, more influential, and by that regard, he is welcoming of people into the metal scene, if that makes sense. So,
no, it makes total sense.
yeah. So, I couldn't put him a lot higher, but at the same time, like, I thought right kind of in the middle was a great place to go.
I love Scott, and I'll have more to say about that in a little bit.
Okay.
Number 6 for me. I'm looking I'm looking at my list. I have not entered the United States yet, by the way. And with number 6, I am still not going to enter the United States. I am still now. Here's the funny thing: I still haven't even entered the British Isles, as I mentioned earlier. So this number 6 is going to stay in Germany with Rudolf Schenker, um, the Scorpions guitar player who's basically been there since the beginning. Um, his brother Michael is a little well known for his lead guitar playing in a certain band called UFO. But Michael was also in the Scorpions as a lead guitar player. The Scorpions have had a host of lead guitar players, but they've only had one rhythm player, and that rhythm player is Rudolph, and he is the guy behind "Rock You Like a Hurricane." He is the guy behind Blackout, the guy behind No One Like You. Those riffs are his. Maybe they're shared. I don't know, like if it was a situation where, like, let's say Matthias came up with a tale of something sort of like how Metallica with Kirk and James. But for the most part, Rudolph is the driving force behind the music of the Scorpions. And you look at his influence. I mean, he's been there since the beginning. We're talking over 50 years of Scorpions. I mean, they were releasing 50-year anniversary stuff several years ago, but they're legitimately over 50 years. It's pretty impressive, you know. So, it's one of those where it's like when you think about what he's done and the music that he has put out there, it's pretty wild. For the most part, they didn't really take off until Virgin Killer came out, but uh, Love Drive is what really put them into the the forefront of the popular metal scene. And the songs on there, Love Drive, Loving You Sunday Morning, Another Piece of Meat, Holiday. Cool. I mean, these are songs all written by Michael Schenker, you know. Excuse me, not Michael Schenker, by
I was
Rudolph
going to
Schenker.
say, I thought we were
But,
talking about Rudolph.
by Rudolph, I saw Schenker, man. I saw Schenker. I thought, first thing I thought it was Michael. No, but Rudolph, and it wasn't until later when Matthias Jabs joined the band that he would get certain songwriting credits, but not a lot. Most of it was Rudy. Was Rudy. And when you look at Blackout, I mean, all music composed by Rudolf Schenker, except where noted. And there's lyrics, and that's it.
I
So
don't know
it's
that song, Where Noted.
except where noted. Yeah, that one. That a lot of bands have that same song. Where noted. So
And every time I look for it on the track list, and it's not there.
it's not there. It's not there. I mean,
Hidden track, I guess.
he wrote all the music for Love at First Sting. I mean, think about that. All the music. When you think about all the music that the Scorpions have put out, this guy has done 99% of it. And he doesn't have anything to do with the lyrics for the most part. That was always Klaus and Herman for a long time. Herman Rarebell, the drummer.
The German.
The German, yeah, Herman's the German. But the music, I mean, Rudolph, think about all those riffs and all that shit. Just amazing stuff. The guy has a acoustic flying V, for God's sake. That's so awesome.
Right.
When we saw them, I mean, they kicked ass when we saw them, they were at the Toyota Center, weren't they?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that was an arena show. And when you and I saw them, I mean, they held the audience. It was not just some band going through the motions at all.
No,
So
they put on a great show.
They put on a great show, and
With Mickey D on drums. That was awesome.
Mickey's awesome. So the other thing about Rudolph, him and Michael basically brought to the forefront the Flying V. specifically the black and white flying V that so many people wanted to emulate, you know, and so they stylized that. I mean, that's all Rudolph plays is flying V's. Him and his brother. That's all they play. Rudolph, my number 6. What do you got for number 5?
My number 5, I have somebody you had on your list for lead guitarist. I have Adrian Smith and Dave Murray. While I love their solos and I love the leads that they play, what really gets me about Iron Maiden in a lot of ways is the riffs and the harmonies that they play. And so when I thought about what really gets me excited when it comes to Iron Maiden, I thought about the riffs and the harmonies and things like the Trooper and beyond just the solos, because the solos are absolutely amazing and maybe they deserve to be on both lists in some ways, but I think we got that covered between the two of us, right? So
Yes.
um, you if you've listened to our show before, you know how much both of us love Iron Maiden. I often consider them my favorite metal band. It's always difficult to say favorite this and that because we go through phases, emotions, and all that bullshit. And but when it goes back to it, I'd say 99% of the time, Iron Maiden's my favorite metal band. And so, that being said, I'm putting them in at number 5. So, it's tough. Like, I pretty much agreed with just about everything you said in the last episode when we talked about not the last episode, but the episode where we talked about um, lead guitars. And so, they have this chemistry more so beyond when Adrian left and Yannick came on board. I didn't think those guys had as much chemistry. And maybe today between the three of them, they really do have something that's pretty magical, especially in the live show. Not as much in the modern recordings, but um, between Dave and Adrian, especially in those early days, there was just pure magic, and kind of alternating and drifting between rhythm and lead parts, and being able to trade off, share those things. Both are songwriters, both bring so much to the table, and even more so, like Adrian brings backup vocals and his own cool, unique style to things. And between the two of them, like they either had to go on this list or the lead guitar list. And for me, I just lean a little bit more when it comes to Maiden into the really awesome riffs than I do into the leads. So that's why they're on this list and not on the other.
I get you. I understand that. And that kind of goes along with, the whole thing we talked about with Hearing Aid and the Ronnie James Dio project, where they came in and they were embarrassed because they didn't think that they were as good as all the other guitar players that were in the room. And so they ended up playing the harmony parts that you hear in the background and the main riffs. So it's pretty wild when you think about that, because they're very accomplished in their own right.
Oh, extremely, yeah.
Yet they were kind of like, no, we're not that good. Very
Humble.
humble, very humble. But yeah, that's a good selection for number 5. However, it's not my number 5. But I'm finally making it to the United States. I'll tell you that.
USA, USA, USA.
Number 5 is Scott Ian for me. I mean, Scott to me is probably the second best right hand in heavy metal. We'll talk about number 1 a little bit later. But man, I mean, when you think about Scott, for all the accolades that you gave him, right? One of the things about him too is that he has to pull it off, and he can still pull it off to this day. And he slows it down, he speeds it up. I mean, they play songs in different keys and stuff like that, and it makes it heavier, it makes it brighter, whatever it may be. He's really good at what he does. He's very good at what he does. And there's nothing that you can sit there and say, well, you know, he's this, he's that, and that. But you know what? The bottom line is he is that badass of a guitar player. And I remember back in the heyday of Game of Thrones, he was invited to the recording studio by one of the showrunners, one of the creators, who also was a guitar player, and they did the intro music for the Game of Thrones on guitar. And they had several guitar players. I think Nuno was one of the guitar players. Um, one of the show writers was one of the guitar players. Scott was another one. I can't remember who the group of guitar players was, but it was pretty impressive. And Scott took part of it, and because he's a huge Game of Thrones fan, and that's the one thing about Scott too. Whatever he's into, that next album is going to be all about it.
That's pretty accurate, yeah.
I mean, think about it. Worship music, while there's some really good songs on it, they were predominantly influenced by The Walking Dead. Then you get to the album For All Kings, and have a few songs. I'm going to say all of them are a lot. A few songs are heavily influenced by Vikings or whatever style of Viking shows were out there. Specifically, they had a song called Blood Eagle Wings. I mean, that is specifically about the Viking. What's the word I'm trying to use? Not culture, tradition. When you, if you can withstand not screaming when you get a blood eagle put on, done to you, you're gonna die, right? But if you can die in silence, you will then go to the great hall and sit at the table of Odin, because you have died with honor, despite the fact that you got this really vicious uh, thing done to you. Where they basically pull out your lungs, right? So that's just insane to think about. They cut your back open and pull your lungs out, and those are your wings.
I gotta say that sounds a little uncomfortable.
you're dying at that point. So
I would vote against that one.
But anyway, and then obviously Scott was very influenced by Stephen King in the 80s. So, several Stephen King influences are all over Among the Living. So that's so super cool. So I'm almost kind of like, what is on Scott's radar now when it comes to whatever album they're going to release either this year or early next year. And I'm really kind of excited to hear whatever they put out. I don't know what could possibly be on the radar, because I don't know what's really popular on television. That I don't think there's anything really that stands out right now as
Let's
big.
just hope he never gets into like reality television.
Oh God, fuck! Don't even get me started with that bullshit. All right, that's my number 5.
Really hot people.
My wife watches some of those shows. I'm just like, no. and it's unfortunate. I get stuck watching it with her, because if I want to hang out with her at all, she's watching it, just like, sometimes she watches baseball with me. And I watched this one, and I'm like, they bring the same people. They regurgitate you were cast off that island. Well, guess what? You just joined this island. I'm like, really? It's ridiculous. You're on this show, that show. Terrible. All right. So Scott was my number 5. What is your number 4?
My number 4 is Jimmy Page. I think you had him on your lead guitarist list.
Yes.
But I don't really think of lead parts again when it comes to Led Zeppelin. I think of the. I mean, it's kind of a mixture, right? Like when we talk about Tony Iommi and we talk about some of those earlier metal guys. Um, there's kind of that mixture of like, especially when you're the guitarist of the band playing both parts. So when I think of Jimmy, though, I think of like the riffs, obviously that he wrote. Um, there is an element of because of him being the guitarist, you can either look at it as rhythm or lead or both, and I got to pick a category, so I chose this one. But I think of like when it comes to Led Zeppelin again, I think of those riffs, and he is another one that I view as kind of a riff master, and for you know, better lack of terms, like just one of the progenitors of the band. I mean, of the genre. Like I mentioned with some of the other guys that we've talked about. So um, there's no denying it. Led Zeppelin has influenced just countless bands, countless entries into these categories that we're talking about. We've mentioned the Led Zeppelin when it comes to drums. I mean, who knows what we talk about when it comes to vocals? Um, they're all over the world, um, just absolutely influential. And a big part of that is you have to have a good riff. And Jimmy Page, there's no denying it, even if you're not a big fan of the band, um, that you hear a Led Zeppelin song, you know who they are, you know what you're listening to. There's not bad playing among any of it. Like there's so many bands out there that you can go like, well, I like this song, but I just don't think much of them. Like even people that don't like Led Zeppelin have, you know, really no choice but to go like they're all amazing players. So, yeah, definitely up in my top, but not as high as some of the other guys we got up there. So,
I had Jimmy Page on my lead guitarist list because of Heartbreaker, um, because of the stuff that he does on Whole Lot of Love, because even though like you look at a song like Communication Breakdown that has that killer opening riff, right? But then when it goes into the breakdown, he's shredding it.
mhm.
So he does both,
Yeah,
right?
he's viable in either category.
Exactly. And so for me, it was more because, you know, as not so clean of a guitar solo as the one on Heartbreaker is, it is still so famous of a guitar solo that it literally made people pick up the guitar and want to play
Mhm.
the guitar. So, that was why my choice was under the category of lead guitars. So there's nothing wrong with him being on the rhythm guitars because he did some killer rhythms, you know. So he's gonna be up there one way or the other. Number 4 for me is still in the States, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Number 4 for me is Paul Stanley from Kiss. Um,
That guy. Well, I know of him.
yeah, you know him? Come on, dude. How come you didn't introduce me?
Um, it was on a cruise, and he was telling a story to the children, and I.
And they were Kiss pajamas.
Okay.
Hi, kids. So anyway, uh,
That's a deep cut right
yeah,
there.
right, right. So Paul Stanley, to me, Paul Stanley is the epitome of what a front man should be. You look at, you think about the classic frontmen. You got Robert Plant. You've got Ozzy. You've got people like King Diamond, uh, Klaus Meine, you know, Udo Dirkschneider, Joey Belladonna, John Bush. They're all frontmen who everyone I mentioned right now really, I don't think plays any other instrument, right? So then you look at the front men that do play instruments. You've got James Hetfield. You have a Tom Warrior, Max Cavalera. Okay, they're not anywhere near the front man or front men that Paul Stanley is. Paul Stanley was the shit when it came to being a front man for a band. I mean, we're talking about Kiss, which is, when you think about it, it's the most bombastic band of, that's pretty much ever been in existence, right? And you have this guy who's standing around, jumping around, hopping around, running around in, 6 or 7 inch heels, right? Stacked boots. And I mean, let me tell you, that's not an easy thing to do. And him and Gene and Ace and Tommy and Vinny, they all did it, but Ace kind of like later on his heels got smaller and smaller, his stacks, because he was a little out of balance. I'll just put it that way. But Paul Stanley, dude. So I'm talking about his frontman stuff, but he's on my number 4 for most important rhythm guitar players. Why? Because not only was he the frontman, but he was the rhythm guitarist for Kiss. And while many people sit there and say, well, he wasn't that good or he made a lot of mistakes, but look at what he did, right? He did all that entertainment, and he's still playing a rhythm guitar at the same time. And you know what? For the most part, maybe he made some mistakes here and there, but he held it together pretty damn good. I look a lot. I've watched a lot of those videos back from the '70s, and yeah, I have one. Like what they released to the public had one version of a concert, but if you go 2 days later to another version from the night from the Alive tour, he's singing a song and he strums the guitar and he literally bangs into the microphone and it falls over, right? So he's waiting for a stagehand to pick up the microphone. Well, it doesn't really come right away, so he still plays the rhythm guitar, but Gene Simmons starts singing the lyrics. Can't remember. I think it was for Firehouse or something like that. So he starts singing the vocals until someone picks up Paul Stanley's mic and puts it back up for him. The guy was an entertainer, and I say was because they're retired now. He's still alive, right? But he's in.
Yes, they thankfully still are alive.
Yes, but as a member of Kiss, Paul Stanley was freaking a badass frontman and a badass rhythm guitar player because he, as far as I know, I think there's like 1 or 2 songs that he's done lead guitar on for Kiss over the years, but for the most part, he just plays rhythm guitar. He knows his limitations.
Yeah.
I mean, when you see him, he tries to do a lead guitar thing in the Animalize Alive Kiss Animalize Uncensored video from Detroit. And he comes out and he's got the spotlight on him, and all he's doing is playing hammer-ons. I mean, I think that's like the first. I don't play guitar, and I can do hammer-ons. Okay, so maybe not well, but he's a guitar player and he's accomplished, and so he can do hammer-ons. But he's not that good of a lead guitar player, and he admits it. He knows it. He knows his limitations. So he stuck at it and said, I'm going to be the best damn front man out there. And I think he did it all the while playing lead guitar. Excuse me, all the while playing rhythm guitar for Kiss. And that's why he's my number 4.
That's a good choice. I don't have him on my list.
How do you say those things to me?
With my voice. You know, I was never much of a Kiss fan until we did this show, right? And I've learned so much about Kiss, and I've watched so many little documentaries about them, and I've listened to Paul Stanley's book. I've listened to Gene Simmons' book. I have this fascination with the band, because they are interesting. And we've done a worst first. We've discussed them a couple times, different episodes, and my appreciation for them grows. And everything you're saying about him as a frontman, I agree with. I don't necessarily agree on the rhythm section of it, but um, yes, he definitely has a high place in the world of who's important, who's influential in metal. It's just tough for me to place, in that
Dude,
regard. So,
you're entitled to be wrong every so often, so you can move forward.
and when I eventually am, we'll talk about it. Moving on to my number three, I have Chuck Schuldiner. Um, Chuck was the lifeblood and writer for Death. He wrote most of the parts. A lot of times he wrote the leads and the rhythm. Um, very complex writer, did things different than anyone that came before him, struggled, to find footing, especially in his day, because there was kind of like the early days of what was being done. Like he was an innovator and, one of the guys that really started death metal. People call him the godfather of death metal for that reason. Like obviously, people that have listened to the show probably know a lot about death now because there has been this renaissance of interest in the band, which is crazy to me because it's I've been a death fan forever, and it's really cool to see people of the modern age really just take to the band, and especially like I know I watch way more YouTube than you do, so like it's a whole different uh just subculture. And to see like some of the comments when I watch like guitarists and drummers and stuff like that, and that they'll talk about, you know, lists, worst to first kind of stuff like we do, or, who are the five best metal bands of all time, stuff like you see like hundreds of comments from people today talking about death. Um, but again, kind of like what I was saying with Millie Petroza, is a lot of modern music now. Like we talk about obviously like the big bands that are still around, like the Big Four and stuff. They're not extreme metal guys, but like a lot of the stuff now that's coming out is heavily influenced by the early days of death metal, and there wouldn't be that kind of death metal that we talk about now if it didn't start from somewhere. And again, it's so refreshing to see, you know, people honor the past and, bring up a band like Death, who unfortunately just never got that kind of attention in the early days when they were around. There was some interest on MTV. They did appear on Beavis and Butthead. There was something there, and obviously amazing musicians that Chuck played with over the years. Um, some of which we've talked about, like Gene Hoglan. But you know, Chuck has had a second life through all the listeners out there that have discovered death in the modern age, and I love to see that. So there is obviously the early influence, and a lot of the bands that we love today got their influence from Chuck, but it's so cool that there's a second generation that's finding that music as well.
I, I've listened to more Death since you and I became friends and we've been doing the show. And there's some really cool stuff on there. Um, I can see, part of the whole second life of the band had a lot to do with the fact that the record company is re-releasing stuff and reissuing stuff and
And
remastering
obviously,
things.
how much I talk about death, that's a huge factor as
Yeah,
well.
I mean your influence in the podcast metal
Yeah.
scene is
Oh
amazing.
yeah, it's so influential.
So, but yeah, I mean, they they're not a band that I ever got into only because that wasn't my thing when I was younger.
Mhm.
So I've listened to more of the stuff now, and I'm more appreciative of the more latter day death stuff than the early stuff. But I mean, there's no denying how good of a guitar player, Chuck was. So, um,
And just to elaborate a little bit more, the reason I don't have him on lead because he did play leads, but most people would be aware that at least fans, sorry, most fans of Death are aware that even though Chuck wrote some leads, he did not always play them. As well as there are entire albums where he did not write any of the leads. Like he wrote the melodies and the harmonies and things like that, but like say for instance on individual thought patterns when what's his name from King Diamond, um
Andy LaRock.
Andy LaRock came on board. He actually asked because he had so much respect for Andy. He wanted him to just like he played him the parts of the songs and said like write a lead solo here. And I thought that was amazing. Like, for somebody that's as prolific as Chuck and that's his band to put that much trust in somebody that he has respect for and says like I just want you to write the lead guitar parts, the solos for this. Like that's amazing. So
No, no, absolutely, absolutely. I give props to Chuck. I mean, he was very intelligent about how he wanted to get his music across.
I agreed.
All right, so that was your number three. My number three. We're getting to the nitty gritty, folks. We're getting to the nitty gritty. Number three, Malcolm Young from AC/DC. Um, Scott Ian, my number five, constantly says that if without Malcolm, he's not playing guitar. He has a tattoo of Malcolm on his arm. The I growing up and being an AC/DC fan, and then even up until recently, um, and then when I say recently, within the last 10 years, let's say, not really grasping how impactful Malcolm is to the sound of, and I say is because the music still exists, how impactful Malcolm is to the music of AC/DC that has been recorded and played out there. It is amazing to think like everyone sees Angus. Yeah, he's the lead guitar player and he plays and he bops his head up and down. But without Malcolm sitting in the background, just pounding away at his guitar, at his Gretsch, and playing those rhythms, AC/DC doesn't really have much. I mean, Malcolm was the driving force behind most of everything of AC/DC up until he retired before he passed away. Stevie Young, his nephew, is a really good uh, alternative. Use that word to Malcolm being in the band,
He's not
but
the name brand, he's the alternative.
exactly. And I mean, but Malcolm is Malcolm, and there's a certain way that Malcolm would hit his guitar, and I say hit because he had, he was a hard riffer, and he banged away at his guitar. The, you think about a lot of those little licks that you hear with AC/DC and all that stuff, and you realize all those really cool rhythms is by that little guy in the back that barely showed his face except to scream into the microphone during Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Treat. you know? So I mean, Angus says it himself. I mean, Malcolm was absolutely the driving force. And whenever it was business, like I was reading an interview recently about Chris Slade and how
He
they,
still thinks he's a member of the band.
you know what, we can actually put that to bed now because he knows he's no longer in the band and he's not bitter about the fact that he was not invited back.
Was that a recent interview?
Yes,
Like
very, very recent.
I
Very,
finally know that I'm not a member of the band.
yeah. They were asking him recently about his whole time in AC/DC, and he said that um, during the Ball Breaker sessions, he actually recorded the drums. He recorded all the demos, and Malcolm called him up, and because Malcolm was the guy who made the decisions for the band, and Malcolm called him and said, "Hey, listen, we're gonna go and we're gonna go back with Phil. We think he's the original guy, and we're gonna go back one." And Chris was hurt by that, and basically said, "You know what? Okay, goodbye." And he did not. They wanted him to stay on retainer just in case Phil didn't work out, and he's like, "No, Phil's your guy. I'm not gonna sit there and wait for this guy to fail."
That's
Which
that's like if you're dating somebody and you're like, I'm gonna go on a date with this person, but like if things don't work out, like I'll be back for you.
yeah, I mean
like
it's absolutely like that.
like screw off.
I mean, I forgot there was another, and I can't remember this because it's not like I could look it up in Google, but there was another. I mean, it's out there, but you can't just do a Google search for the situation. There
I
was,
mean, you can, but it'll be like a
yeah,
TV show
I
about
don't,
the Jersey Shore.
I don't know if it was a guitar player or a vocalist, but he was held on retainer in the event. Well, I know that happened to Nico McBrain with Iron Maiden. He was on retainer just in case Clive Burr couldn't pull off a couple shows.
Yeah, there was more to that story. I'm sure they were just trying to get him in the band.
Yeah, but I mean, they had him on there. They had him as because they were having trouble with Clive. They called up Nico and said, "Hey, can we'll pay you this, whatever. Can you just kind of be on hold, type
Mhm.
of thing?" I can't remember the other one, so I'm not going to harp on it. But anyway, um, Malcolm Young. I mean, he is the guy who is the driving force behind ACDC. He's my number 3.
Well, he is my number two. Pretty much everything you said there. I don't want to rehash too much. But yeah, I mean, all those riffs that like that background rhythm, like he is a true rhythm guitarist, right? Like you listen to Let There Be Rock, and he's just as much as we talk about like Phil, he pounding away on the drums, like he is keeping that rhythm, keeping that tempo just as much. Songs like that really stand out to me when it comes to Malcolm. And obviously, like their ACDC has like a very distinct style, a very recognizable way of playing music, and a big part of that is just like what you said, him slamming away on the guitar, doing that particular riff rhythm, playing through, and it may be a little bit repetitive, but that's where you have the other aspects like Angus's lead parts that are creating that kind of diversity. And so, um, you know, like you said, without that basis of the drum parts and the rhythm guitar, especially, like you don't have an ACDC. And without Malcolm, like it's not the same. But it is nice to see they're still going on and they're still doing their thing. And there is that kind of somewhat continuity because you have a family member that's stepping into the role and playing and doing good justice to, what was there before. But without Malcolm, there's something lost there. And um it's one of those that I don't complain about, and I don't think like it's a bad thing that they keep going on. Um, but the guy was special, and he is like when I think of rhythm guitarists, like he's up there. Obviously, I put him at number two. He's one of those guys that I just like. He fits the definition of rhythm guitarist.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so that was your number 2. My number 2 is a guy from. He now lives in Colorado. He made his name in San Francisco. His name is James Hetfield.
Okay.
James is my number 2 only because he bows down to my number 1, put it that way. Um, when you think about James and you sit there and you see the accolades that come from his peers, you know, Alex Skolnick says, this is a concert probably during the, I almost want to say during the Death Magnetic tour, but it may have been during, I think it also may have been, it might have been during the Hardwire tour. But he said he saw Metallica and he watched and he stared at James playing the whole night. And he said James didn't make a single mistake when he was playing. And James will admit to him to everybody out there that he makes plenty of mistakes and he's out there doing his things and they joke around and he says he embraces the mistakes because he knows that makes him and everyone else look real. But in Alex's eyes, he says, I didn't see any mistakes that night. For when you hear the accolades like that from your peers, that's awesome. And you think about what that guy has done since 1983. Um, putting it this way, the best right hand in metal. I said Scott Ian was the second best right hand in metal. James is the first to me, in my opinion. And my opinion is mine, obviously. Um, if you don't agree with it, then we'll take it outside and talk. But he has a
I was
very
going to be threatened.
he has a very unique style of playing rhythm guitar. He has a certain way of chugging and repeating little notes on his guitar that's very unique. It's not necessarily unique to him, but not very many people do what he does playing the rhythms that he plays in Metallica.
Maybe not unique now, but I think like especially at the beginning, he was pretty unique. As far as
absolutely. At the
there's a
beginning, he
lot
was
of people
definitely
that have copied his style.
right, and still haven't perfected it. Um, he's down picking. I mean, the band itself, Metallica basically kind of brought down picking to the forefront. And for those people who don't understand what down picking is out there, if you play a particular rhythm, right? What I just played, even with my own tongue, is kind of going up and down or down and up, however you want to look at it. When you're when you're hitting the string, you're hitting it down and then up. Okay. Well, when you hit a string down and up, the attack on the string is different going up than it is going down. So Metallica and all their brethren in the thrash metal scene, for the most part, was where it really kind of came to light. All played downstrokes on all their speed songs, or all the songs in general. But so it wasn't this real simple thing, they're playing everything down, so they're playing, their hand is moving pretty much twice as fast to get the same thing that you're doing going up and down. So it also has a different sound to it that you don't realize makes the way it sounds. So that's in and of itself, they kind of perfected that. They put that out there to the masses, and obviously, they it wasn't something that was alone to them. Scott does it, Kerry and Jeff does it, Gary Holt does it, Alex does it, Eric Peterson does it. They all do it, but Metallica, because of their fame and notoriety, kind of made it more famous than, for them. So for James is my number 2 because the one guy ahead of him just so happens to be, a little influential. But James is James, and everyone knew I was going to put Metallica on here, which is when and where it was going to show up. So here it is, number 2.
Okay, well, my number 1, you might have guessed, is James Hetfield. I think, like I've mentioned before, I think Metallica is an easy entry point into metal. Um, you know, I've known a lot of people over the years that was the band that made them fall in love with metal, and then maybe from that point they diverged off and found their genre that they fall in love with. And I'm kind of one of those people. Like, I found other bands that I liked. They weren't the only band that I liked when I first started getting into metal, but they were one that I really just found my feet in the genre with, right? And so one of the biggest parts of that is the front man and rhythm guitarist James Hetfield. And what you mentioned before, like his style of playing, his attitude, um the look, all those things, like they were big factors in influencing people within his own scene at the time, like the Bay Area scene. People that grew up in your generation, my generation, and so on. Like when we went to watch the most recent thing, the we saw the what was it in theaters that
Oh,
uh,
the M72 tour that was live in theaters. Yeah.
it was 72, right? When you looked at the audience that was there in just a local theater, there were people of, all different ages, uh, male, female, different races, all those things. Like, it was so cool to see, all these people that just, you know, could find some common ground through music. And, it was really refreshing also to see young people, older people, just all sitting enjoying music together, right? And that's not even at a concert. Like, people went to go see that in a theater. Not every band can say that accolade that, people go see them in a theater when they can't go to the show. So that's pretty cool. And as far as like rhythm guitarists, even more so than when I think of Malcolm, I think of James. And it's beyond, like, think about the complexity of the things he plays, the difficulty, the rhythms that he does play. Sometimes little leads here and there, whatever. Um, but beyond that, singing metal music typically, especially of thrash and the heavier genres, the lyrics are not simple, and they're a little bit more poetic, and lines don't just repeat themselves. There's not just constant choruses. Obviously there are songs that are, but there's a lot of times a story to tell, right? And James does all those things masterfully, and it's hard for me to think of anybody that I think of beyond um, James in those categories. So I'm interested to hear who your number one is.
My number one is Tony Iommi from
Okay,
Black
well, I mean
Sabbath.
that makes sense. Yeah.
So, and the reason, so I didn't have him down for leads because I think from in, based on what I like about Black Sabbath, he is more of the rhythm guy, even though he's the only guy that plays guitar in the band. Um, Tony, James, like I said, bows down to Tony, and he is the riff master. When you think about the songs that Black Sabbath have put out, you don't necessarily have a song that has a standout lead. To me, that's why I didn't put him in there. But you have so many riffs that uh, Iron Man. You've got Fairies Wear Boots. You've got um, NIB's more of a bass heavy song, but it's still, there's still a riff to it. The Wizard, War Pigs, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath. What's the other one? This Snowblind, um, Children of the Grave, Symptom of the Universe. I think I said Symptom of the Universe already. Um, and so it's just uh, those riffs are constant, and they're just so unique for Black Sabbath. That was that's all Tony. I mean, when you think about Tony, you think about all these amazing riffs that became these amazing songs for Black Sabbath. And so that's why I had to put him number one because originally my list had James first and Tony second. But I'm thinking to myself, if the guy who says Tony is my idol says Tony's my idol, and Tony was the guy who basically helped foster and create this genre, there's no way I could put him lower than number one.
Now, what if he had said Rod Stewart is my idol?
Then he could say Rod Stewart's his idol, and vocally, not a guitar playing. Oh, Sweet Leaf was the other song I'm thinking. I mean, think about the riff on Sweet Leaf. I mean, god damn, that was a good song. um, and then later on, as Black Sabbath progressed to be more of a heavy metal band, specifically when Dio joined the band, you've got songs like Neon Nights and Heaven and Hell that have this killer riff. But even Heaven and Hell is more, again, is very, it's got that riff at the intro, whatever, but it's mostly driven by the bass line. But Neon Nights, Mob Rules, great riff. I'm not as familiar with the Tony Martin years and all that.
Well, now you can be.
I know I can, but
I know I can, but
but I'm not going to. No, I've listened to a few of them, and I'm like,
I'm interested to hear some of the remixes that they've been working on.
Yeah,
especially from some of the latter day stuff. That I didn't enjoy as much.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I heard what was it Headless Cross? I heard that remix. It's pretty cool. I mean, it doesn't sound dramatically different. It does sound better. But I don't think I don't think he veered too far away from the original, only because
not on Headless Cross, but I think on what was it?
I think Forbidden.
There's gonna have the most remixing, I think. For sure.
I think the biggest one is probably gonna be Born Again when he comes around to it, because he finally found the tapes.
Yeah, but I mean of the
ones that are done, yeah, the Tony Martin era. So I mean, I had to put Tony first because he's just, I mean, the riffs.
Oh, yeah, fair enough. I mean, if I'm thinking about it, like I easily could have put him on this list instead of the other one. It's just, mindset at the time, right? So
right, no, of course.
Either way, he belongs up there, and like I said earlier, we've got that covered on both ends. So
absolutely. I mean, when you think about some of the people that we didn't mention on this list, again, me leaving off, K.K. Downing and Glenn Tipton, I left off Adrian Smith and Dave Murray, but then you got guys like Brad Whitford from Aerosmith.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that guy held it down. All he did was rhythm guitars.
Like Robin Crosby, I think, is deserving of being up there.
Yeah. I said Brad. Steve Clark from Def Leppard. I mean, he was their main riff guy.
Yeah.
Until he passed away. Obviously, Gary Holt, Jeff Hammond, Kerry King, you mentioned on your list, and one guy that we did not mention, you had him on your list for lead guitar players, Dave Mustaine. I mean,
yeah, it's funny. I actually had him on my list today, and then I was like, I had him on lead. I think I'll sacrifice it this week because I mean, he easily belongs on rhythm as well. So
yeah. There's lots of guys out there. I mean, every time I do the research for some of these episodes that we're doing, I stare at my CD wall and I say, okay, where are we at here? And next week is not going to be any easier, when we go record the vocalists, because there are obviously a vocalist for every single band, and only 10 are going to make the top 10, and Who are those 10? Because there are some interesting voices out there, and a lot of them influential.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's gonna be a tough one. So I'm definitely interested to hear that one.
yes, as am I. All right, debating metalheads, that brings an end to this week's episode of Debating Metal. Remember, you can listen to us just about every week on your favorite podcast platform by clicking like, subscribe, follow, or download. You won't be disappointed that you did.
And don't forget you can interact with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. YouTube viewers, click subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when we post the new show. So remember to check out our next episode where we'll conclude this series with the 10 most important vocalists in metal history. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe and always turn it up to 11.
See ya.